We're going to go back now to our top story with Jonathan Fowler, who is an UNRWA spokesperson, joining me now from East Jerusalem. Jonathan, I hope you can hear me. Tell us about the situation in Gaza at the moment. What were the main points that came out of the press conference that was given by your Commissioner General earlier today?
Well, beyond the absolutely tragic numbers, talking about the number of internally displaced people, 1.7 million, or the death toll, we've got over 34,000 people dead, over 77,000 injured, unprecedented humanitarian crisis. There is a particularly important point that Philippe Lazzarini flagged, which is the level of trauma which is ongoing within this humanitarian situation. As he put it, it's not post-traumatic stress disorder, not PTSD, but CTSD in the sense of constant traumatic stress disorder. So the daily life, the quest for food, the daily fear of people in Gaza, that continues, and that is simply worsening. Again, huge anxiety about the possibility of an offensive in Rafah.
Indeed. And something that we've just heard recently from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying Tuesday that the Israeli military will launch that ground offensive in Rafah with or without a truce with Hamas. When you hear that, how do you feel?
This is extremely worrying. The population of Rafah has swollen by 6 times basically since the start of this war. There's been perpetual waves of displacement from north to south. People have been displaced multiple times within the Gaza Strip. So the number of people there, the level of the humanitarian crisis that could happen, and of course we have to hope that this does not happen. But the level of the crisis would be far greater than anything we've seen so far in this war because of the sheer number of people, the sheer level of stress, the sheer lack of supplies, and the number of people who are stuck in basically in shelters under the United Nations flag. And we've seen, of course, throughout this conflict that sadly the United Nations flag, people go to these shelters for protection, and 400 people have been killed in our premises since the start of the war.
Jonathan, what's being done exactly, concretely, to help get aid in at the moment? For example, are you optimistic about this new pier, this floating platform that's being built by the U.S. Navy?
Well, all efforts to get more aid in are of course important, but as with airdrops, appears, the issue here is that there are options which exist to get aid in, and that's through land. We need to get 500 trucks a day of supplies into the Gaza Strip. The best that has been managed since the start of this war was on the 22nd of April, when 310 trucks of supplies were able to get in, so that's not 500. But on average, through this month, so in April, the daily average has been 192. That falls far short. But land crossings, trucks, those are really by far the best option. And that has to be the focus.
Jonathan, making things even more difficult for UNRWA. UNRWA lost much of its funding in January after Israel alleged that 12 of its 13,000 Gaza staff were implicated in that attack October 7th. Now, those cases have either been closed or suspended due to a lack of evidence. But what kind of effect would you say have those allegations had on your operations in Gaza?
Well, clearly, if we were having this conversation at the end of January, beginning of February, the agency was in something of an existential crisis because the financial shortfall presented by the decision by donors to freeze funding meant that it was not possible to guarantee the continuation of our operations in Gaza and the rest of the region beyond the end of February. Now, as a number of donors have returned over the months since then, the situation, the level of crisis has eased, but we're now in a position to be able to continue operations through to the end of June. The big question is what happens after that. I just wanted to mention that we have, of course, there's been a groundswell of grassroots solidarity as a result, partly of what's going on in the war in Gaza, but also perhaps in response to some countries freezing funding. We've actually collected an unprecedented amount of $115 million from the private sector, for example, and we've also had new donors come forward, Iraq, Algeria, for example, and a number of donors, say Ireland, Spain, which have actually increased their traditional contributions. But regarding countries which have lifted their freeze, of course, the fact that Australia, Canada, Finland, Germany, Iceland, Japan, and Sweden came back, that has been absolutely critical for at least us to be able to continue operations and have some visibility through for the coming 2 months.
Right, but then there are countries, for example, like Switzerland, that have still not resumed their funding of UNRWA. What are your feelings about that? And will countries like that come back into the fold? Do you need them?
Well, indeed. I mean, we appeal to all donors to return. Today, there have been a number of decisions made within the Swiss Parliamentary Commission, which is working on this issue. That's very, very fresh news. And we're still studying what this will actually mean, because, of course, the Swiss role in humanitarian work around the world is extremely important. We are also awaiting news from Germany because, of course, Germany did return, but it only returns for our operations outside of Gaza. But last week, Germany announced that they were planning to resume funding for operations within Gaza. We're currently in discussion about the amount. Germany has been a top donor, notably for food aid. So it's extremely important that donors, traditional donors and new donors step up on that front. But of course, the big issue for us remains the United States. The US congressional decision to put a hold on any funding to UNRWA through to March next year. The United States, traditionally our top donor, and in fact, the US now represents about 87% of the money that we're lacking in our budget to be able to continue operations.
All right, Jonathan, thank you for taking the time to speak to us. Jonathan Fowler, an UNRWA spokesperson, joining me from East Jerusalem.